Hello, everybody. Glad you could join us tonight. Sorry we got a little bit of a delay. My name is Gregg Kimball. I'm the Director of Public Services and Outreach at the Library of Virginia. I'm really delighted to be hosting today. Co-hosting with me is Joseph Rodgers from the American Civil War Museum. And today's program is really, really special for me because having worked on a lot of the records related to the Tredegar Ironworks and on the restoration of the Tredegar Ironworks too long ago than what I really want to remember. I met in the course of that Viola, and I'm trying to remember, is it Baecher? Is that the correct pronunciation of your last name?
Baecher.
Becker, okay.
Uh,
And we had it must have been 15 years ago, I can't believe it, when she was just starting to explore all these incredible stories of her ancestor, Emanuel Quivers. So today we have 3 descendants. We will actually have 4 in a minute. We're hoping our other panelists will be able to jump on. And they are going to tell us a little bit about, what does it mean and what was the research like. So who we have with us here today is Dr. Denné Reed, and he is at the University of Texas at Austin. He is an anthropologist, and I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about some of his work, and which does somewhat relate to what we're talking about today. We also have Viola Baecher, who is a retired school social worker, and her daughter, Victoria Baecher Wassmer, who is an assistant secretary with the Department of Transportation. And as I mentioned, all of them descend from a gentleman named Emanuel Quivers, who lived here in Virginia back in the pre-Civil War period. I'm just going to start off by having Victoria and Viola tell you a little bit about the story of Emanuel Quivers.
Absolutely. So, Mom, you want to just tell the story about what you heard from your father?
well, basically, my father used to tell all of us children, always remember about your family. He said, you are descendants of, 3 families, the Rodgers, and he made a point of saying it was Rodgers, the Rodgers, the Quivers, which many people say the name Quivers because it's Queyvers, but Daddy would spell stuff out to make sure you knew the written manner and all of that, the Rodgers, the Quivers, and the Halls. And as the years passed, he didn't give us much information. He gave us the names, and I knew that, my older family was from California. And it's been a wonderful experience just to try to trace my lineage on my father's side, because there's some just marvelous discoveries, and to share that information with the rest of the family. It's great to see you, Denné.
And so I was able, my mom would come to Washington, D.C., which is where we live. And she moved here from Chicago and joined us about 4 years ago. And she would come to visit us, and she would be going down to Richmond. And she said, I have discovered this amazing history around Emanuel Quivers. And she had met Gregg Kimball when she was doing research at the Library of Virginia. She was going down and looking at the original archival records from from the Tredegar Ironworks that showed really the records of Emanuel coming in as an enslaved wage earner at Tredegar. But going back to that period, she actually traced Emanuel to the Berkeley Plantation, which is on the James River in Charles City County.
Yeah.
He was born in 1814. He is the son of Jonathan and Sarah Quivers, and he had siblings also there at Berkeley. And he then was trained as a blacksmith. And that actually had been the trade that his father, Jonathan, had as well. And what's interesting is you can see in an inventory that's there on the Berkeley Plantation from Benjamin Harrison IV, both the record of Jonathan and his trade, along with Sarah, who was Emanuel's mother. He then made his way to Richmond, and it's sort of interesting. We're not sure all of how that is, but we do know that many of the plantations were struggling in terms of really being able to make a profit off of the land. They had drained the quality of the land because of the production of tobacco, and we know that they were hiring out many of the enslaved workers from the land. Emanuel was in Richmond, and he was there at the Tredegar Ironworks because there's a record of him working again as a wage earner, but also his manumission papers were bought by Joseph Reed Anderson in 1845. And so there's a record of that transaction with the Harrison estate. And at that time, those papers were held by a law firm in Richmond, and it was noted in the ledger that the agreement was that he would be able to earn wages from which he would then be able to purchase his freedom. We also have documented his relationship with his wife, Frances, and the early children. And Marianne Quivers is, in fact, our my and Denné's great-great-great-grandmother. And that was, in fact, one of their early children, and born in Richmond. And it's in the census records that Mom was able to discover all of the records of this information.
Really amazing.
Come to find out, subsequent to that, Emanuel was entrusted with a mission to go to California with a Mr. Worth, again, based upon the launching of the Tredegar Ironwork management, and that was in 1849. And then from that period, traveled to California in a mining expedition. He ended up coming back to Richmond, and he had sufficient funds, along with he and his wife Frances, to purchase her freedom and the freedom of all of their children. His manumission records were released based upon the agreement that had been agreed to related to his mission to California. And then they traveled back for Emanuel back to California, but then for the first time to California with Frances and their 5 children at the time. And it's just a fascinating and amazing story. It doesn't end there. In fact, in California, Emanuel and his family were, they ended up settling in the Stockton area. He was highly regarded. He went to a number of organizing activities. He was on the forefront of desegregating education within the California school systems. One of his sons was the first African-American student to progress on into an integrated high school. He actually broke the color barrier there in California. He also ensured that there would be rights for the testimony of Black and Brown people in the legal court system within California. And so it's just an amazing story about an amazing family, and we've been really blessed because of Mom's research to have that connection. And so that's just a little snippet about Emanuel and some of what is very inspiring. And I am going to put in the chat a short video that I did, because one of the silver linings of COVID is that we were sort of homebound, and Richmond's not far from Washington, D.C. And so I was able to go down and travel and retrace a lot of what my mom had uncovered. And we actually went to the American Civil War Museum and went inside and sort of had that experience of imagining Emanuel working there. He, in his obituary, it is noted that he was one of the people who helped to really find the sort of secret of the puddling method of the Welsh ironworkers. And that's really fascinating. Of course, you ended up having a strike there by the Welsh ironworkers. That's quite famous. And it said that he needed to have armed guards that would escort him when he actually went to the job site. So you can imagine that was, he was perhaps not the most popular individual with everyone during that time. But anyway, we find this story really inspiring, and Denné and I have been wanting to ensure that it doesn't get lost. And this is part of what we think about in this idea of how do you learn from the past as you move forward to the future, and the benefit of that.
just to add a little context to that, of course, one of the most exciting things Joseph and I get to do is not only do we get to study history and research it and sometimes write books and stuff, but being in the public with the library or a museum, you actually, most 19th century historians would never ever meet the descendants of the people that they write about. And it's one of the most exciting things really that happens to me during my career. And just so folks know, this puddling technology that the British had pioneered, particularly the Welsh, they held this skill very, very closely. They didn't want other people to learn it because it was their job security. And of course, the strike was also prompted by race. They certainly didn't want other white people to learn it either, but they certainly didn't want enslaved people to learn it. So it is a very unique and powerful story. And I guess, so on my side of things, I get to sort of vicariously enjoy people discovering things. Denné, for you, being yourself an anthropologist, a social scientist, although you study things that are millions of years old, I think, what does it mean to you in terms of this story and, just personally?
Personally, it means a lot to me. First and foremost, it's just an opportunity to engage in the exploration of my past with my family. It's been an experience that's offered a lot of opportunities to bring us together, to work together, and to spend time with my family, which I really enjoy, and to learn a bit about that history, which has, I've heard bits and pieces of it growing up, but to really flush that out and learn more about it has been inspiring for me. And I think it's just also such a fascinating American tale, in a sense, that brings together so many different elements of the history of this country and the very diverse experiences that people have had in it, and ties a lot of them together. So I've always found that really intriguing. And on top of that, it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of put to use, I guess, in a more immediate context, some of my skills and expertise. I'm a biological anthropologist that studies human origins and human evolution by training, but also with experience in archaeology. And so the opportunity to kind of put some of that archaeological expertise to work and to explore things in the recent as opposed to the distant past is fun. And it's neat to see too how some of the methodologies overlap, some of the things that we do that are similar, and how they're different. So that's been exciting and fun as well.
Great. Joseph, I know you've worked on a lot of really great projects here in Richmond. And your own family story also has kind of an interesting parallel to that of our guests. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'm sorry if I'm a little at a loss for words at the moment. There are parts of the story that you just shared, Victoria and Viola, that I did not know about Mr. Quivers. And his is a story that we've told at the Tredegar Ironworks for some time. But I did not know that he was born in 1814 at the Berkeley Plantation, which is in fact the same year and the same place in which Martha Ann Fields, my 4 times great-grandmother, was born. And so that connection that's being made right now is quite powerful for me. Also everyone, this is Loki. He's my cat. He enjoys the conversation as well. But so I'm gathering my thoughts back right now, because to think about our ancestors actually meeting in that space and in that place is quite fascinating, because just like Emanuel ended up in Richmond, Martha Ann ended up in Hanover after one of the mistresses died. One of the slaveholders there died. She was given away as property as an inheritance gift to Catherine Berkeley, who then married Philip Winston, and they made their home at Nutshell Farm up in Hanover County, from which she would eventually seize her own freedom. She and her children left in 1864 during the Civil War. And James Field, her son, actually left a little bit earlier than that, and he left on his own, made his way down to Richmond, was captured a second time, but then was held in the slave jails at Shockoe Bottom before making a second escape, this time for good. And eventually he would go on to be in the first graduating class at Hampton University, graduate from Howard University, and then was elected to the General Assembly in 1889, and was the last of 4 black men to be in the General Assembly of Virginia before Jim Crow era segregation. So for 75 years. And so thinking about all of these connections that families have, just our families right here in this space, but then like seeing all those ties straight to the city of Richmond and all the efforts that are going on, the Shockoe Bottom restoration efforts, the markers that the Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality helped get put up, removing the concrete from the first African burial ground in Shockoe Bottom, getting that signage going. It's incredible to see those kinds of efforts done, and I understand that you all are undertaking some efforts of your own to get these things memorialized. So I would love to hear more about that, as we just unveiled, oh, it's up here, on June 24th, we unveiled the Fields Family Historical Marker at Hanover County. And so I'm excited to hear about what your plans are and what you're working on.
Wonderful. Well, wow. I mean, Joseph, just to imagine, and I am going to be excited to learn more about your family members. When we were down in Richmond back in October, we did travel through the museum, and I saw I think there's a painting there of some of the African American men members, and I'm sure that must have been most likely one of your ancestor who was there, memorialized in relation to being a legislator, and just how significant that was, and what an important aspect of our history. And what we are working on right now is a historic marker on Emanuel Quivers, that would be outside of the site where the Berkeley Plantation is currently. It would be signifying, his place of birth and his experience. And it's been something that we felt was, a really important way, because that also is a popular spot now with the bike route, and people are stopping along the way and able to learn more about this important part of history, and also the agency that the enslaved had in their lives that often doesn't get told. And also, having traveled then to Richmond and seen Shockoe Bottom, that is in fact the area that I know Emanuel and Frances lived. They were members of the First African Baptist Church, and traveling there and sort of seeing what you're saying in terms of the rupture of Richmond. My husband, in fact, said, "Oh, there's a slave jail that's on the other side here," and I was saying, "Oh, there's the Gabriel Memorial." And then just to be able to get there, you feel like you're taking to walk as a pedestrian across 95 and to go down. We all kind of have been there. Denné hasn't yet, but he's hoping to get there once things open up for travel. And the importance again of the African burial ground that's there, and all of the Lumpkin jail, and just seeing the significance of that. We happened just by chance to be arriving on the date October 10th of this past year. That was the memorial date, and they had an event for Gabriel, and that was a really significant occasion, and it allowed us to understand more in the depth and the pain, as well as the perseverance, and the incredible history of enslaved people and free Black people in Richmond.
Yep.
That's great. I'm glad that you were able to be there. I was that was one of the events that we're really proud of, and we're glad that gets done every year. That was oh boy, that was the 16th annual event. So we hope you'll be able to see you again there soon. You're coming up later on this year. This is incredible, and I'm really glad that you were all able to be a part of that as well.
The other part, and I'd love for Denné to talk a little bit about this, that he and I have been working on is thinking about how do we document this information, but also look at the experience at Berkeley. And so we'd love to talk with you, because we're looking at how do we look at the descendants of the enslaved from Berkeley. And in fact, I know that Sarah, Emanuel's mother, is buried there on the grounds. And that's documented in the Westover Parish Church, because the minister came from Westover, that's the plantation abutting Berkeley, and performed the service. And thinking about the burial ground there at Berkeley, and so we've had conversations with the people that are the owners of Berkeley about that process and how much of history is actually in the ground. And so, Denné, experience that, you worked on that, and love to get your thoughts about that process.
Yeah, it's fascinating that even in this engagement, so much that comes out of doing this work is like the discovery about learning about new descendants and these relationships and all the historical connections. There's still so much more to learn that is wrapped up maybe in the lived experiences of those people as it may be documented in the archaeological record and still preserved in these places. I think we're at a kind of unique moment in time where maybe we have an opportunity, kind of a unique opportunity to advance the search and understanding of what life was like on these plantations, and to learn more about the specific histories of these individuals that we're learning about through the historical record. And so fortunately, we've been able to open up conversations with the people at Berkeley Plantation and other places to start to think about, what might be possible in terms of locating burial sites. Many of them are unmarked. We have some ideas of where they might be, and it turns out that currently there are historical archaeologists and historians researching the history of these places that have some ideas about how the plantations were laid out in the past, where graveyards for enslaved people may have been placed, and how the landscape has changed over the many decades and centuries. And so yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of, hopefully, some opportunity going forward to do some of the archaeology, maybe investigate also some of the genetic relationships between people that kind of both confirm and support the documentation that we have historically, and maybe learn more and more deeply about both how people lived their lives, what they were able to accomplish, and the broader range of relations and interrelations among people today. So I think that'll be really exciting.
I think maybe we might have my Uncle Rodger on.
Oh, okay.
I'm on.
Are you?
Wonderful.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm glad you were able to come, Rodger. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. We've been trying all this time to get on with the webinar, but it has not worked. And I've been on the phone with Emma, and we just couldn't get in, so I just called in.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Well, since you're here, we wanted to talk to you a little bit too. I thought it was kind of maybe ironic isn't the right word, but I didn't realize until Victoria told me that you had been a minister at 3rd Street Bethel AME, which is one of the great historic churches here in Richmond. And I guess I imagine when you were there, you might not even have known about your ancestors that were here in Richmond. Tell us a little bit about what your takeaway is about the whole family story and what it means to you.
Well, the Richmond story, I did know. I came with Viola to the library when we discovered the information that we needed. And she and I walked the plantation, the Berkeley Plantation, which was it was a spiritual experience. It was, you could feel your ancestors. We walked that plantation, Viola and I, and she's done a lot of work. And I've been doing a lot of work also. Victoria's doing it, and so is my cousin in California, Roz. She has done a lot to help. That the whole situation at Berkeley is where my interest lies. As I pastored in Richmond, I saw the different relationships between the two communities, the African American community and the white community. And as a matter of fact, Richmond is a predominantly Baptist town for African Americans. And I was the only one, and I worked well with a lot of them, but I was the only one who would cross Broad Street and work with the Episcopal Church and Father Hetherington and the Second Presbyterian Church. As a matter of fact, I preached in all those churches at least once a year. We had the Downtown Richmond Coalition, and we fed the hungry, because during my period there, the first thing, the stores downtown were trying to get all the indigents off the street. They said they were hurting the economy. And I worked with Richmond Tomorrow, which is an organization of Richmond people across all kinds of lines to look forward to see where Richmond was going and how we were going to get there. And as a matter of fact, Tim Kaine, I helped him toward his first election. And as a matter of fact, indicated to him then he'd one day be governor. And he said he didn't want that. He and his wife were beautiful people. But we worked with City Hall. We worked on all the projects, and then I would represent the downtown community ministry in going to City Hall. I would do the speeching, and we had some interesting encounters down there. But Richmond is a rich place for finding roots, and my basic interest at this point is I'm more interested in Sarah Yellow Harrison Quiver and her husband Jonathan, and his father, who came from Connecticut. And of course, he was born in 1722, I believe it was. But to find out why he left, and he left his son, and of course, when Emanuel was born, there were quite a few children born, but he seems to have fared better than most. And that might have been, I'm more interested in how he got really to Tredegar, and how Anderson got control of his life, because and I'm sitting here looking at a copy of the letter from General Anderson to Henry L. Brooke of Richmond in June 27, 1850, when Emanuel went to California because of the gold rush. And as soon as they got there, then within a year, I think it was, California became a state. But when they went in that San Joaquin Valley area and the Modesto areas were heavily mined, and that's where basically our family grew together with the Quivers and their daughters, and the Halls and the Rodgers. As a matter of fact, my name, my father was very conscious of his history, his family history, and he named his first son after him and his father, who had come from Mississippi from a plantation to California. But in the Richmond experience, I was the only one who actually lived, and my family lived and worked there. I was president of the NAACP and worked across many communities. But my interest is in, at this juncture, is in finding, because Sarah, and they say Yellow Harrison, was the daughter of Harrison the fifth, and his cook, whose name was Patty. And I found nothing about Patty, and I'd like to find Emanuel's first wife, his wife, and her family, where she came from. It'd be an interesting story, because the backstory is going to tell you a lot about the condition of lives in Richmond area around that period of time. And I can't find anything on John Quivers, who came from Connecticut and then returned to Connecticut, they say. But to be able to enrich the backstory, to understand how Emanuel really got to, and I have a picture of Emanuel, and which is odd, but that fits into Harrison V was the signer of the Declaration of Independence, and of course the fifth president was a Harrison on the same line. So to find out how all this meshes is something that I was been trying to discover, and it's not something you're going to get much on through just going through the heritage things like the ancestry, because there are issues that for some reason you don't get those kind of answers. But the DNA across time has proven to be positive, and as DNA has gotten better, very positive about her being the child of Jonathan, of the father of John Quivers. And because I was always concerned with how did we get the name Quivers within this family tree, and of course that's where it comes from. And so I have a deep interest in getting that kind of information. I lived in Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and my wife is from Virginia Beach, and I would come to Richmond, and when I would come to Richmond, when I met her, I was pastoring in Norfolk. At the end of Norfolk, I go out in the street, I'm in Virginia Beach. And I did notice that it was very strange on Broad Street. Most of the African Americans walked on the inside as you look toward the expressway on the left side of the street, and many folk were very careful and cautious about going into some of the stores. And of course, I found out later in Washington, D.C. why. Because in the early days, they didn't want you in the stores, and because they didn't think you had the money to buy their kind of wear. And Tallheimers was big in Richmond at that time. So it's been an interesting situation, because at that time we had superintendent of schools was an African American, and you had the great lawyers who helped in the civil rights movement and who were very important serving in the city. And of course, Doug Wilder, while I was there, was elected to be the governor of Virginia. So it was a very exciting time. But I'm very curious, and I'd like to get that backstory kind of hashed out for myself. Going to California, that was the most exciting place on earth at the time. Everybody was trying to get rich with gold and silver. And the formulation of our family talked to in the Modesto area and also in the Sacramento and the San Joaquin area very diligently. Some great folk came together. And even my grandfather came from, he came from Minnesota to California to serve in Stockton at a church. And that's where he met his wife, who was my grandmother, who died early. And she had a faithful experience on the a roller coaster with my father. She didn't want him to go on the roller coaster, but she got on with him and his friend, and she had a heart attack and fell off the roller coaster right there at Santa Monica amusement area, where we used to go and take the kids to play. So it's very interesting. It's very challenging in some ways because you're trying to get the filter of how everybody got together. And it was not until I saw this business of how Anderson let Quivers go to California with someone else still a slave and had to finish out his time working with that gentleman until his time was out. And then he could be free, but still Anderson would receive remuneration every year. And at the end of Quivers' time, if he was faithful to the gentleman he went with, they still would have to pay, and it was a Mr. Worth. And so you don't get much more information. So I've got stuff that the younger guys can really go at if they want to. It'll be interesting.
I think this is almost like a golden age now in terms of really changing the narrative. I mean, to live in Richmond, I think Joseph would agree with this. Right now, in the last year or so, has been pretty revolutionary in terms of how some of this history has been really changed, and in a good way. I came to Richmond, I guess it was 35 years ago, and it was a very, very conservative place. And it's great to see. I know Joseph saw a lot of activism. What do you think is the kind of, do you view the work that you're doing now to some degree as activism in terms of redefining the role of African Americans in American history?
Well, you see, when I got to Richmond, I had been through the Civil War of the 60s with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and with Dr. King's group. I was a part of that. As a matter of fact, I did the Operation Breadbasket on the West Coast, and I was the deputy director of SCLC and worked with. That was a very trying time because that was the period in when a lot of people just got killed. I mean, the police stormed the Panthers across the country at one point, and Ron Karinga and us, another organization. So I worked in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area. But my father, our foreparents always tried to prepare us for what was coming. In 1959, my father, I came home, I was playing baseball in Chicago at the junior college and wrestling. And I came home and my father said, pack a quick bag, you're going to Washington. Well, that was the second youth march on Washington by the NAACP when Eisenhower was in office. And of course, he was playing golf when we tried to go to the White House, but that's another story. But that's he injected us into situations and into formative situations. When I went to Wilberforce University, I got into trouble with my brother, who was president of the NAACP, on another campus because I was more vocal than he wanted me to be. And so I've been in the civil rights struggle most of my life. And my father, for instance, sent me to a meeting at a big Catholic church in Chicago on the west side. And what was happening was the first real meeting in the community with some community leaders. And I didn't know why he sent me. I was not a community leader. But when for what became known as gentrification, going to build all of this housing and put the poor people in them. And then they were going to move them and changing this whole business of changing communities by letting them deteriorate. Where we lived when I first went to Chicago, the street doesn't exist. They put a big project on there. And of course, the project was full of all kinds of problems. But so that's been what I've done most of my life. I've gotten older and I'm more quiet now. But in Richmond, you could tell who were of the old school, and a lot of people on Broad Street. First thing I noticed, they didn't really look up. They when they got on Broad Street, went up and down Broad Street, they kept their eyes straight ahead, but almost with a downward look. They were still being careful, and yet a whole lot was going on in Richmond to better Richmond at the time. So Richmond should be a whole lot better now. They got all the land they need for building all those buildings downtown, and it was a wonderful experience working across the line with the white congregations and the leaders on the other side. As I said, we all fed the hungry. At 3rd Street Bethel, we were feeding up to 200 and 300 people every Wednesday. And the numbers there were higher because we always cooked chicken, baked ham. We gave a full meal. So it was an interesting experience. And there's some marvelous people who were working in Richmond. And I've got some dear friends, Neverett Eggleston, and I worked on a lot of things together. And so it was a good experience.
I remember you. Well, so we got a question. We're getting towards the end of our program. I apologize. I need to run in a few minutes because I was silly enough to book myself back to back with Zoom presentations. But I did want to ask this question we had, which is an intriguing one. You mentioned school desegregation in California. And I'm getting this question from somebody I know here in Richmond. And of course, that didn't happen here until, as we've been hearing, until really the 60s and 70s. And in some ways, it never really actually happened. We won't get into that. But when did it happen in California? And you know, tell us a little bit about the Quivers' involvement in that.
Well, Vicki's got that now. Victoria has that.
So I'll share about that. I did want to make I thought there was a nice sort of circle related to, my Uncle Rodger's story around the efforts to kind of cross racial lines, thinking about how to give meals to those in need. One of the interesting things that I read about with the First African Baptist Church was how incredible that organization was. And you had both enslaved and freed Blacks who were congregants. and they raised money to send because of the Irish potato famine. They send funds to Ireland in order to be able to help those who were in need. And I just find that so remarkable when you think about what their lives were as well. They just understood what suffering meant, and they wanted to be giving in that way. And I just find that that's such a marvelous image about how they worked and they organized and they took care. And it was something that spanned even international lines, which I find amazing. So just thinking about the Quivers family and education and pioneers in California, it was Emanuel McPherson Quivers, who was one of the sons of Emanuel and his wife, Frances, who in high school was able to attend and integrate and break the color barrier related to high school, because at that point, and it's probably something equivalent to 8th grade, that was where educational options ended for the African American community. And they actually then petitioned the courts and opened up the school system for him to move forward to attend high school. And we actually have some really fascinating experiences with education in California through the late 1880s and into the 1900s. And the other side of my family, on my mom's mother's side, also were real pioneers in Sacramento, especially in the both for women and for African American women. My great grandmother Viola, who my mom Viola is named after, was a real trailblazer who came from Missouri into Sacramento. So I think those things go deep and run deep, and education was a real cause for them. And Emanuel McPherson Quivers looks like he was a real character. He has a couple of correspondence that include a note to W.E. Du Bois about getting his Crisis magazine, and he had been paying for it, but he hadn't been receiving it. And he notes that his son, Jonathan, had in fact been serving for a year in World War I, was one of the representatives from World War I from that part of California, who went to serve in France for the U.S. So just an amazing set of experiences and histories we're able to uncover, really due to mom's work.
And also, if I can just throw this one in, also Moses Rodgers' daughter, two of them graduate. One of them, Vivian, graduated from Vivian Rodgers, graduated from the University of California at Berkeley, and that was some time ago, and she went on to Hawaii to teach. Caught a fever and had to come home, and she passed not too far beyond that. But the family was pushing for education, and of course, Rodgers was the one in California who gave a park to the city of Stockton, who spent his own money to dig for gas. And when there was no gas in the city, and spend thousands of dollars in that. When he owned all those, he owned mines, and then when he was a metallurgist. He was well schooled in what he did. So a bunch of fascinating people, and I think that the Modesto and San Joaquin area, that they would get on horseback and go up in the hills after emancipation and let folk know that they were free and help free them. So Stockton was, and that San Joaquin area was loaded with people who had come from all over to California because of the gold and the silver, and gave them, but they demanded life and they struggled for life. And the civic they gave a whole lot to the state of California, as all those books about the pioneers of California will tell you.
Wow. So this entire conversation again has been so incredible, and I wish we had a little bit more time to just continue. But even as we do have to sign out for now, we know this is more just the beginning of these kinds of discussions than anything else. I'm always looking forward to seeing the work that's done by families and bringing their own family history and their family stories to the fore. This has probably been one of the most exciting ones to see, because it is through family work that we can get this work done, and it's that because that kind of passion and drive that's brought so many of our stories just to the forefront again in the most recent years. And the parallels are uncanny. We'll have to discuss that at some point in time. I could go on about how my grandmother is named after her mother, and then her daughter is the one who did the research on Martha Anfield. And
Yeah.
this tossed down, but we really, this has just been so wonderful, so very wonderful. So thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Miss Viola. Thank you, Dr. Reed. And thank you to Uncle Rodger. I can hear your voice. I can't see you, but I'm getting a good picture in my head because you remind me a lot of my uncles too. But it's been wonderful, everyone. And I want to thank you again to all of our attendees who have joined us today to listen to this program, all 50 to 60 of you who have come on. This has been incredible, and thank you for joining. Again, I'm Joseph Rogers with the American Civil War Museum. We had Gregg Kimball from the Library of Virginia. This is the first of our Civil War and Emancipation Day programs, just the very first. So tune in for more. If you'd like to see the full roster of events, you can go to CWED, RVA.com. You'll see all the programs that are coming up, including several in-person outdoor walking tours, pre-recorded videos, and more live discussion programs as well. So until then, though, we want to thank you all for coming. Thank you to the family and descendants of Emanuel Quivers. And we want to continue this conversation again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'll be there after the pandemic's over.
We look forward to seeing you.
Mr. Katz,